You have 10 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Last Harley, because the head fighter at that starts. Harde, Shasam Shania Vosper Gorle, Mahakiach, the Horton Rachtiach, Fear Havachtasha. Agus Fall Team Rivendesh, must winter of the Ledner Rachtiach, a renewal. Takutwa Dini Raw, Gurhor and Zeesbrucha, Argal like Namra, Agus not Horgamachtura make the fit for you. Agus Kegadigam of Wintershin, Ni and Team Lesh. Bannon and Rachtiach, less launch in the man. Les Lante Lani, agus Bannon Gach Far, Ban, agus Posh to Edenilancha. Jawarna Himplachti ta Ege o Heave Slanja Pibli, Sherivishi Taki the Vrat I Gumperclinia, agus Argut Fragrity, Dargo Hirani. There's a lot of debate at present as to what expertise we as senators have to offer citizens regarding the scrutiny of legislation and debate around the implementation of laws that affect all of them. When it comes to the protection of life during pregnancy bill, I cannot claim any specific expertise, but I can bring my life experience to bear on the momentous decision we are being asked to take. As a father of 5 who was present for the birth of all my children, I probably have quite a unique insight into the anxiety which surrounds couples at the time of birth and the interaction with our health services in this regard. My wife and I have also had to deal with the trauma of miscarriage and the emotional upheaval that goes with losing a child. This is an experience that many Irish people have had to deal with, and indeed is part and parcel of our humanity and the inevitable and inscrutable cycle of life and death. Thankfully, all of my experiences with those services were very positive. I think this is a particularly important point to emphasise, as all of my children were born in University Hospital Galway, which has been subject, rightly so, to an intense amount of scrutiny of late because of the appalling way in which Savita Halappanavar was treated in that hospital. I hope that at the very least her case will ensure that no woman will ever have to suffer such a systemic failure again in an Irish hospital. From my own experiences, however, I must in particular pay tribute to the midwives, nurses, anaesthetists, doctors and junior doctors who were absolutely fantastic during the births of my children. I honestly believe that this is the experience of the majority of people who interact with maternity services in Ireland, and this is borne out by the success rate for childbirths in this country, the low rate of mortality amongst mothers and children during childbirth, and this is a very important point to make. So what are we looking at in this legislation, and why am I supporting it? Thankfully, this legislation would never have applied to the births of my children. Thankfully, we never had to deal with the situation where the life of the mother was in danger. These occasions are very rare, and that is what this legislation pertains to. Thankfully, we never had to deal with the situation where the health of the mother was in danger. These cases are obviously more common, but this legislation does not allow for intervention in those cases. I know people who are in this situation at present. In their particular case, the legislation would not apply as the life of the mother was not in danger, albeit that the prognosis post-pregnancy is quite alarming. Thankfully, myself and my wife never had to deal with the situation of suicidal ideation during pregnancy, which is part and parcel of this debate. But we did have to deal with postnatal depression and all of the upheaval and anxiety that goes with that. This did give me an insight into the fragile and complex nature of a woman's mental health, particularly around childbirth, and it is an area which I feel has been distilled down to a very simplistic and naive analysis by some people who are opposing the legislation before us today. Thankfully, my children were born to parents who were overjoyed at their births and relieved that there were no complications for the mothers or children as a result. This is not the case for every child born in Ireland today. When I analyse the legislation before us, I try and put myself as far as possible in the position of those who this legislation will apply to if and when enacted. This legislation, in my view, is very limited in its approach. It allows for medical intervention in pregnancy under very specific circumstances, when the life of the mother is in danger. Not when the health of the mother is in danger, not if the woman is pro-choice and wants to end the pregnancy, not when the woman has been subject to rape or incest, not when the husband thinks the life is in danger, but when, in the professional opinion of experienced medical doctors, her life is in danger. Then and only then can intervention be made. Any intervention made in any other circumstances is a crime, with a maximum penalty of 14 years in prison. Life isn't black and white. Medicine is not cut and dried science. Doctors differ and patients do die. Every case can have its own complications and peculiarities, just as every one of us has our individual differences, and every child born is a totally unique individual with their own personalities and physiological needs and challenges. My own experience has been of 5 incredibly different births. We've experienced long, drawn-out labours, and labours that have had us rushing to hospital just in time for the birth of one of our children. This legislation deals with cases where there are difficulties and complications. This could happen to any woman at any time. Medical complications don't discriminate on grounds of race, social class, intellectual ability or other factors. Any of our wives, sisters, daughters or friends could find themselves in need of intervention of this type. And for what it's worth, I want the doctors to have legal clarity as to what they can and can't do. Not just for those close to us, but for any woman having a baby in Ireland today. Doctors are faced with huge dilemmas every day, and I have immense respect for their ability and commitment, particularly in our inadequate Irish hospital system, where doctors and nurses find themselves under tremendous pressures. Inevitably, a small number of doctors in Ireland will find themselves in situations where they are faced with a pregnant woman whose life is in danger. Every doctor has a duty, as a result of the Hippocratic oath they have taken, to do all they can to save human life wherever possible. The dilemmas doctors will be facing will be that they have a woman whose life is in danger and another life to consider. Doctors in Ireland will, I believe, use every option available to them to try and save both lives. This legislation will support them in doing that. Where the doctors feel it is not possible to save both lives, they will have the option to try and save the life of the mother by intervening in the pregnancy. Doctors in Ireland, I believe, will make every effort as part of that intervention to save the life of the child in question. Neither the life of the child or the mother can be guaranteed, no matter what type of intervention the medical team take. Medicine isn't that simple. Life isn't that simple. If it were, this legislation would not be so contentious. I believe that this legislation clarifies, not changes, the constitutional situation in these matters, and it will clarify in primary legislation the responsibilities of doctors in this regard. If my wife's life had been in danger during childbirth, I would have been dependent on the expertise and judgment of the medical professionals dealing with the birth. In situations like these, decisions often have to be taken under extreme pressure and very quickly. Any factor which causes lack of clarity legally or ethically, therefore, must be tackled by us as legislators to allow such decisions to be taken as expediently as possible. Much ill-informed debate on this bill would seem to infer that suicidal ideation is a bit of a fictitious ailment, not a real sickness, and can be dealt with by a bit of counselling, and that it isn't really a threat to life. I don't concur with that analysis. I believe that the safeguards in the legislation, where 2 psychiatrists and an obstetrician must make a call on this, and the appeals mechanism, will be more than enough to ensure that sufficient care will be taken in this area. I'm also a practising and active Catholic, albeit with a relatively liberal ideology. I've discussed this legislation with many good friends, among them members of the clergy, some who support and some who oppose the legislation. I don't think that makes them better or worse Christians. I believe that there have been polar opposites very vocal in the campaigns we have witnessed. These are very small minorities at either end of the spectrum, with the vast majority of Irish citizens, for many of the reasons I have outlined above, in favour of it.
1 minute left.
Good, Margaret. They agree with the Supreme Court rulings and the voices of Irish people of good conscience who voted in 2 referenda that this legislation is not only right and necessary, but very much overdue. Munu sin, tá mai taco leis an reachtaíocht, agus tá mai gimpi am a chó hanadúí an rud céanna a dhéanamh. Tá píosa reachtaíocht sé píosa fada techt, tá sé teastáil go géir, mollam an rialtas a sé hort chun cín, níra an díosbrocht se éasca, tigam na pointí tá techt ó chuintíh agus na ómós agam do gachtar tá chuir go túirmí chun cín in se ach déireann go bhfuil an lá se fíorthábhachtach, tá reachtaíocht se fíorthábhachtach agus se fíorthábhachtach go dúirt muid gach tacaíocht.